welcome back to my channel and to my January wrap-up. So I feel like January was actually a good reading month. I read 8 books, 7 physical and 1 audio, and it was a bit of a mixed bag. I didn't love everything that I read, but it was varied, it was just an enjoyable month, and I had my first 5-star read of the year. So I'll start with the book that I rated 2.5 stars. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting a huge amount from this book. I had read this author before and didn't love her other book. I had still wanted to read this for a while though. It had been on previous TBRs and I just hadn't got round to it. And that was Thin Air by Michelle Paver. Now, both of her books that I have read have been described as ghost stories. They have both been set in very remote, isolated locations, real wintry reads, very snowy, icy, that kind of vibe. But the whole ghost story, the whole creepy, spooky, scary feel to them has just been completely missing for me. So Thin Air is about an expedition to climb a mountain. There is a group of people who are following in the footsteps of previous explorers. They decide to climb the mountain, take exactly the same route, and hope to make it to the top and then back down again. So the narrator of the story is the brother of the expedition leader, and they don't really get on. They're very much a sibling rivalry, and that continues as they are trying to climb this mountain. The whole time they're going up, he feels as though they're being watched, they're being stalked, there's something after them. And so you're supposed to feel, they're in this perilous landscape. They are at risk constantly. There is a continuous sort of risk of death. They're also in the middle of the Himalayas. So the weather, the climate, everything is against them, but it is supposed to make you as the reader feel as though you're with them. There is supposed to be this atmospheric theme running through, and for me it was just completely missing. There were some quite interesting descriptions, but there were also a lot of terminology used with absolutely no explanation or description about what the author was actually trying to say. And it ended up just not being very interesting. And as I say, not scary, not spooky. It lacked in what I had ultimately been hoping for. So I kind of just feel as though after 2 books that unfortunately Michelle Paver is not an author for me. So I gave 2 books 3 stars, and the first one was The Glass Woman by Caroline Lee. And there is a quote on the cover of this book, which I'm not going to read because I feel it's a little bit spoilerish. But this was, again, a book where I felt that the author tried to do too much. She tried to be too many things with this book, and ultimately wasn't really any of those things. So I felt as though she wanted to write a real gothic piece of fiction. The thing about gothic literature is it needs a huge amount of atmosphere. It needs a fantastic, beautifully described location and setting. It needs to feel completely isolated. You need brilliantly written characters, and this just didn't really have it. I also felt like she was trying to write a mystery, and to be honest, it wasn't that mysterious. A lot of the twist elements I just found to be very obvious, and I think she was also just trying to write a really beautiful piece of literary fiction, and unfortunately I just don't think her writing style suited that. I don't think she quite achieved what she'd set out to achieve. Essentially, this book is about a young woman. She lives in a very, very remote part of Iceland, and she is essentially married off. So this book is set in the mid-1600s, but this young woman is married off to this man who essentially helps communities thrive. And a lot of people rely on him, a lot of families and communities rely on him to survive. But he has secrets. It's kind of implied that he's a really imposing figure, that he's not particularly likeable, that he's not very friendly, and that she is really struggling to get to know him. But I didn't really like any of the characters. Even the main character, I just wanted her to be more interesting. I wanted to be on her side. I wanted her to discover what his secret was and to show herself to be this strong, independent woman despite her situation and despite the time that she was living in. But it never happened. And as I say, the mystery elements just weren't that interesting. I found the twists a bit predictable. I kind of guessed within the first quarter of the book, I'd kind of guessed where this was going to go and where this was going to end up. And unfortunately, I was right. There was nothing about this book that made me second guess myself, made me think about things. I was just kind of reading my way through and not particularly interested. I just really wanted more descriptions of the landscape, the setting, and there really wasn't enough of that either. There was nothing really there that made me feel as though I was in this place, and that to me is one of the really important things about a book like this. If you're going to pick a really specific setting and try to have this atmospheric gothic feel to it, then you need to go 100% into description and setting and location and atmosphere and have all of the vibes going. And unfortunately, this book just didn't have it. So the next 3-star read was The Haunting Season, which was an anthology, 8 short stories by different authors, all set during winter. They were all on a wintry theme and all mildly spooky, ghostly, atmospheric. Now, I didn't love any of these stories, but I will be honest and say that I didn't dislike any of them either. They were all individually between a sort of a 3 and a 3.5 star read. They were all just okay on their own in their individual short story merits. I thought overall as a collection that it was actually quite good. I didn't mind it. I thought that it was an interesting selection. I had not read any of the author's works before, so that was actually quite interesting as an introduction to them. And a couple of them, I do actually own books by them, but I just haven't got around to reading yet. So that felt quite nice to feel as though I already had a slight glimpse of their writing style, so that if I do go on to read their other stuff later on, I've already got an idea about what their writing might be like. I then read 2 4-star books, and the first one was a non-fiction, and it was Buried Beneath the Boarding House by Ryan Green, and this was a true crime book. It's very short, it's only around 150 pages, and it revolves around the story of Dorothea Puente in Sacramento, who essentially just went around killing people for their money. She would befriend the most vulnerable people in society and essentially have all of their benefit checks made either into her name, or she would help them bank their money and give them a place to stay. And then she basically killed them all off. And then she cleverly disposed of the bodies in a variety of ways. It was a really interesting story. I had never heard of her. She really just came across as the nice little old lady who was looking after people. And so when the truth comes out, it's kind of horrifying. I really liked Ryan Green's writing. He just told the story. He just gave the facts of what she had done to people and how she was caught. He gave a really good backstory about her and her history and her childhood and growing up. But he was also very good in that he didn't attempt to romanticize what she did and defend what she did. He didn't, say that she turned out this way because she'd been horribly abused as a child and she didn't know what love was. It was very to the point of she was a nasty piece of work, she killed people, and she ended up in prison where she belonged. But it's a really interesting book and I would highly recommend it if you are just wanting a quick read that's a true crime story. So the next 4-star read for me was a real surprise. I was not expecting to like this at all. Mostly because it's a fantasy and it has the word dragon in the title. And I am not a fantasy fan, and anything with dragons, anything like that, just bores me to tears. However, this book, the dragon, is really only referenced to. There were no actual scenes involving dragons flying around and setting fire to things. And the book in question is The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. So, as I've said in previous videos, I am reading Stephen King novels in chronological order. This was the next book in line to read. And I just wasn't really that enthusiastic. I thought it would kind of end one of two ways, that I was either going to really struggle to get through it and end up DNFing, or I was just going to whiz my way through it, have pretty much no to a low opinion of it, and just get it done and out of the way. And what actually happened was I listened to the audio version. The narrator was brilliant, and I actually really enjoyed it. I have not been converted to the way of fantasy, but I definitely came away with a completely different opinion from what I was expecting. So this book is about two brothers. They are born to the ruler of a fictional land, and the king dies. So the oldest brother inherits, becomes the new king. However, the king had a magician working for him who was an evil son of a bitch, and he wanted to basically rule and have the other son in charge. So he kills the father and has the eldest son imprisoned so that the next son can take over. It's then essentially a variety of people working to discover the truth. What happened to the king? How was he killed? Was he killed? Who killed him? And can they save the eldest son from being executed? I think the reason why I enjoyed this was because of the audio version. The narrator was absolutely brilliant, and the voice he used for the magician was as creepy as hell. He was brilliant. He was very good generally at voices for all of the characters, but that one was, it was spine tingling. It was the sort of voice where you look over your shoulder expecting there to be somebody behind you. He did a really good job. I was really impressed. The story was actually quite interesting and good. It held my attention. It's fast-paced, so really easy to get through. The characters were all pretty likeable, apart from the magician, who is a complete shit. But otherwise, it was actually quite a fun read. And as I say, really quick, fast-paced, easy to get through, and I weirdly enjoyed it. I then gave 2 books 4.5 stars, and the first one was The Shuddering by Anya Ahlborn. I have never read any of her books before, and I've heard a lot about her, so I was really looking forward to reading something. And this was the perfect book to start with. It's so creepy, brilliantly atmospheric. It's set in the wooded mountains of Colorado. Everybody's snowed in. There's a group of people who go to stay in a cabin, but we also get glimpses of other people who are in other areas, and people are basically being picked off. They are being brutally killed, literally torn apart by some freakishly horrifying, scary creatures. This is the ultimate creature feature. You don't really understand what these things are, apart from the fact that they can literally tear a human being apart. It's a brutal book. It's violent and gory and disgusting. And it will probably have you checking doors and windows, but so good. This really did have me feeling cold, wanting to wrap up, feeling that atmosphere. The descriptions of this isolated setting were absolutely fantastic. The descriptions of these freakish killer monster things were brilliant. The people were all great, really well written. One character I didn't love quite so much, but then nobody else did either. And I just really, really loved the writing, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading more by Anya Ahlborn. The next 4.5 star read was Dolly by Susan Hill. And if you're like me and you find kids a bit creepy and you find dolls a bit creepy, then this is a creepy book to read. This is about 2 children, one of whom has been orphaned, and they're cousins, and they end up being sent to live with an aunt in a very isolated, remote house. Again, this is pure gothic horror, brilliantly described location and setting, creepy people, creepy kids, but is there any other kind? Also, nasty little spoiled brat child, and then dolls who get buried in graveyards. I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail otherwise about what this is about. You just need to read it. It's very short. It's around 150 pages. It's a super quick read. I read it over a weekend and absolutely loved it. And then finally, the 5-star read, the book that I absolutely loved. And this was also probably the book that I was most looking forward to reading this month in my wintry TBR. I have read one book previously by this author and I'd absolutely loved it, so I was really looking forward to reading more by him. And that is Bone White by Ronald Malfi. So this book has such a good beginning. It basically starts with a man walking into a little diner. and he's covered in blood. He doesn't look particularly great. He looks ill. He's asked if he's okay, and then he basically admits to murdering a bunch of people. And then he just goes and sits on a bench outside and waits for the police to turn up. So that's how it starts. It turns out we are in the middle of nowhere, some tiny little town in Alaska. And the police go out and they start finding bodies. So there is another man who's in another part of America, and he turns on the news, sees this news report, and his brother has been missing for over a year. And the last place he was seen was in this little remote town in Alaska. So the brother flies out, goes, and starts trying to investigate. He wants to find out what's happened to his brother. Is he dead or alive? Is he one of the bodies that's been discovered? And just where has he been for the last year? What happened to him? Why was he out there anyway? But it's such a good story. It's absolutely gripping. I was completely hooked. Ronald Malfi's writing is something special. It's really hard to describe. He just grabs you and holds you and keeps you reading until the very, very end. He's also just very good at writing a mystery, wanting you to find out what happens. And this book is exactly that. It's a mystery, there's creepy stuff going on, it's a bit folklorish, but it's also very much about the people. It's about the people of these really particular types of towns. When you're living somewhere that remote and isolated, you become remote and isolated in yourself. You know, they don't trust strangers. They hate having people turning up, strange vehicles turning up in their town. Nobody wants to answer questions. Nobody trusts anybody. It's very difficult to get a simple answer out of anyone. Nobody wants to give anything information. And it's a real sort of character study about these types of places that you can find all over the world. It's not just about weird Americans. They can be anywhere. But I absolutely loved it. I loved the writing. I loved the atmosphere. I loved the setting. I loved the characters. I loved the mystery, the fact that you really didn't know what was happening. You didn't know what was going to happen next. There were twists, and the ending was just brilliant. So they are all the books that I read in January. Let me know what you read in January. What was your favourite book? What did you not love quite so much? What are you planning on reading next month? I will be back with another video soon. Bye.